We'll start, of course, our class a little bit earlier. Just I want to talk something about the gains from trade. I think the gains from trade is a very important issue in international trade. And it does help you to have a better understanding on the benefits of international trade. Okay. Now, in the mercantilism theory, mercantilist theory, a nation believes a nation encourage more export than import, and they do believe more gold or money is better than than expend money. Okay, yes. They expend money. This is the but we need to have we have to observe the gains from trade from all perspectives. Okay. Yes. The law of comparative advantage exists that with trade, each country will find it favorable to specialize in the production of the good of its comparative advantage, and will trade part of this for the good of its comparative disadvantage. Okay. Taking advantages of specialization can result in production gains for both countries. Okay. Both countries. Okay, that means each country can focus on producing the products by taking the full edge of its productivities or specializations. Here we address the terminology that is specialization, and it is the greatest contribution of the wealth of nations. Okay, by David Ricardo. Okay, yes. That is the international division of labor and specialization. Okay, specialization.
Okay. Teacher, we cannot see your PPT.
Do we have PPT, teacher?
No PPT this time. I just gave some more explanation on the contents for the last class. Okay.
Okay.
For the last class. Okay, that is the gains from trade. Okay. Okay, now I give an example. Japan's open to the global economy is an example of the steady gains from the comparative advantage. Okay, now responding to pressure from the United States, Japan opened its ports to international trade, and after more than 200 years of self-imposed economy isolation, in autarky, Japan found that it has a comparative advantage in some products, and a comparative disadvantage in others. For example, the price of tea and silk was much higher on world market than in Japan prior to the opening of trade. Well, the price of woolen goods and cotton was much lower on world markets. Japan responded according to the principle of comparative advantage. It exported tea and silk in exchange for imports of clothing. By using its resources more efficiently and trading with the rest of the world, Japan was able to realize steady gains from specialization that equaled 8 to 9% of its gross GDP at that time. Okay, this is an example about the gains from trade. That is the gains. That is the production gains from specialization. Here, the specialization refers to the comparative ante, the relative comparative advantage. Okay. Now, next we would like to talk something about the consumptions from trade, consumption gains from trade. In the absence of trade, the consumption alternatives of country A, of nation A and country B are limited to points along their domestic production possibilities schedules. Okay. The exact consumption point for each nation will be determined by the tastes and preferences in each country. Both with specialization trade, the two nations can achieve post-trade consumption points outside their domestic production possibility schedules, or that is the production possibility line curves. Okay. That is, they can consume more weight and more autos than they could consume in the absence of trade. Thus, trade can result in consumption gains for both countries. Okay. The set of post-trade consumption points that a nation can achieve is determined by the rate at which its export product is traded for the other country's export product. This rate is known as the terms of trade. Here, we introduce a very important theory, that is terms of trade. What is the terms of trade? The terms of trade defines the relative prices at which two products are traded in marketplace. Okay, this is the terms of trade. The terms of trade defines the relative prices at which two products are traded in the marketplace. Okay. This is what I want to make up for the last class. Okay. Okay, everybody, can you see my screen now?
Yes, teacher.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Chapter 3.
This is the chapter 3. That is the demand and supply, the alpha curves, and terms of trade. Okay. And just now I mentioned the very important theory, that is the terms of trade. Okay. If we want to assess a country's position in the global trade, we often use the terms of trade. Okay. Okay. In this class, we are going to learn the following issues or contents. Okay. The first one, that is the brief introduction. And the second one, that is the equilibrium relative commodity price with trade partial equilibrium analysis. Okay. Another one, the next one is the alpha curves. And the next one is the equilibrium relative commodity price with trade general equilibrium analysis. Okay. And the last one is the relationship between the general and partial equilibrium analysis. and the relative commodity price differences. Now we go to the first part, that is the introduction part. The relative commodity price differences between two nations in isolation reflect comparative advantage and forms basis for mutually beneficial trade. Just like I mentioned, the relative commodity prices differences, okay, between the two nations in isolation, okay, that is in the condition without trade, okay. And also the price in commodity, the different prices in different commodity in one commodity reflect the comparative advantage of the individual nations, okay. And this is the basis for the mutually beneficial trade, okay. Not for the mutually trade, but for the mutually beneficial trade, okay. Can use partial and general equilibrium analysis to determine equilibrium relative commodity price at which trade will take place. Can use the partial and general equilibrium analysis to determine equilibrium relative commodity price at which trade will take place. Okay. Okay. We will see the next slide in figure. Now we come to the equilibrium relative commodity price with trade partial equilibrium analysis. Okay. At relative price greater than P1, nationwide excess supply of X panel A gave rise to nationwide international supply of the curve of X. Okay, this is the panel 1, this is the panel B, this is nationwide market for commodity X. Okay, this is a DX, and this is the SX, this is demand curve, and this supply curve. We got the P1, that is the equilibrium price. Okay. Okay. At the relative price greater than P1, okay, this is we got the P1, this is an equilibrium price. If we got P2, okay, we got a P2, so the nation 1 has the motive intention to export more products, and from B, E, we got the export. Okay. Give rise to supply of the supply curve of X. Okay, that is therefore now in panel A we can see this is the SX supply curve, and for the price change, okay, the nation 1 will expand or increase its supply in international trade. Okay, so this is the world price of equilibrium, that is E star. Okay, at a relative price lower than P3, nation 2's excess demand for X give rise to nation 2's demand for imports of X. Okay, at a relative price lower than P3, lower than P3. Oh, this is the P3, lower than P3. We can see that nation 2's excess demand for X. Demand for X, and this will make that is the for X give rise to nation 2's demand for imports of X. The imports Okay. Now below the P3, the price. Okay. The nation 2's market would like to import more X products to satisfy the needs of in the domestic market. Okay, this is the equilibrium. Okay, with trade with partial equilibrium analysis. Okay. Only at P2, the panel B, does quantity of import demand equal quantity of export supply. Only at P2, in panel B, P2, okay? That is the, just now I mentioned, this is the equilibrium price in the world market, okay? Thus, P2 is equilibrium relative commodity price with trade, okay? Okay, this is the equilibrium relative price with the international in the global market. Okay, this figure, that is the index of the relative index of relative US export prices. Okay, we use the data in 1995 as the as a baseline, that is 100. Okay, the baseline. Okay, this is I think that is the from the year of 1972 to the 2006. Okay. Okay. The alpha curves, sometimes called the reciprocal demand curves, reciprocal, introduced to international economics by Marshall and Edgeworth. Okay, that is the alpha curves. We all sometimes call the reciprocal demand curves. Okay, shows all the alpha curves shows how much of its import commodity a nation demands for it to be willing to supply various amounts of its export commodity. How much of its import commodity a nation demands, okay, for it to be willing to supply various amounts of export commodity. Okay. And the alpha curves can be derived from production possibilities frontier. That is not just now in the microeconomics, we use this, we have ever learned this terminology, this concept, that is the PPM, the production possibility frontier. Okay, and in different curve, in different map, and the various hypothetical relative commodity prices at which trade could take place. Okay, can be derived from production possibilities frontier in different map and the various hypothetical relative commodity prices at which trade could take place. For the figure 3, we can see that is the derivation of the alpha curve of nationwide. Now we can see that this is for this curve. This is the what we see, that is production possibilities frontier. Okay, frontier, and we can count the point F, and B. There are different combinations of the production. Okay. Okay. And at this point, F, okay, we got the line. That is the PF. If for the PB production possibility, we can see that. Okay. The PB equals 1, and PF equals to that is 1 second. Okay. That is the derivation of a curve of nation. Okay, this is the alpha curves. I think that is the we can see that this is the derived alpha curve of nation 1. Okay. But how to express this point in English? That is the how to say that? Check. Okay. Okay. Well, this is the point of tangency H. Okay, and this is of the point of tangency F. This is the tangency B. Okay, tangency B. Okay. Now from this from the figure, the left figure, we can see the PB, the PF. Okay, PB and PF. Okay, and for from the right figure, we can see the alpha curve of a nation. Okay, the alpha curve for the PA, the PF, and the PB, right? PF, PB, and PB. Okay, and for the different in different alpha curve, we can got the different supply, the supply of all the alpha curve, that is actually this is the supply curve. Okay, and we got the supply demand, the demand of supply, that is 60, 40, and 20. Okay, and 20. Okay, that is the PB equals to 1, PF equals to 1 second, and 1/4. Okay, and also the derivation of the alpha curve of nation 2 is just vice versa. I think the vice versa for the trading part, for the trade between the two countries. Okay. The equilibrium relative commodity price with found at the intersection of alpha curves for two nations. Okay, the equilibrium relative commodity price with trade found intersection of curves for two countries. Okay, then the alpha curves, that means that is the product possibility frontier. Okay, frontier. There is an intersection of the alpha curves between the two nations. Only at this equilibrium price will trade be balanced. Okay. At any other relative commodity price, quantity of imports do not equal quantities of exports, placing pressure on relative commodity price to move toward equilibrium. At other relative commodity price, quantities of imports do not equal quantities of exports, placing pressure on relative commodity price move toward okay. For the figure, that is for figure 4 to 5, that is the equilibrium relative commodity price with trade. Okay, that is the nationwide of the alpha the alpha curve. The alpha curve, and then there, this is the nation 2. There's an intersection of the intersection point. Okay, and at this time, and this is the equilibrium price. Okay, this is equilibrium price. But also this is the alpha curve, that is production, that is the PPF for the nation 1. This is the PPF for the nation 2. And at this point, at price 40, okay, there is we got the 2 results. That is the PA, that is price A dot equals 4, PF dot 2. Okay, a little bit complex, I think. Okay, the relationship between the general and the partial equilibrium analysis. Both partial equilibrium and the general equilibrium analysis use production frontiers and in different maps. Okay, in different maps to find the equilibrium trade price. Okay. Only general analysis considers all market together, not just the market for the more commodity X. Okay, this is commodity X, this is commodity Y. Okay, changes in the market for X affect other markets, which possibly impact the market for X. Okay. General equilibrium analysis is therefore required for more complete analysis. Okay, I give you an example here. Now, a trading example includes many countries. For China will find it advantageous to enter into multilateral trading relations. Okay, and the real world of international trade involves trading relations even more complex than what we analyze in the figure. Okay. Now we can see that the equilibrium relative commodity price with partial equilibrium analysis. Okay. That is the PX, that is the term PX, PY, that is the terms of trade. Okay. This is the demand curve and this is the supply curve. Okay. And this is the global equilibrium point E. The price is $1 for the excise supply. Excise supply. We can got the part from R dot to R dot, that is the excess supply. Okay, and at this point you got the excess demand. Okay, the excess supply, and the excess supply will drive the price down to the equilibrium price. Okay, and the excess demand will push the price from lower point to the equilibrium price. Okay, the term. Okay, what is the terms of trade? That is the ratio of the price of nation's export commodity Okay, before we talk about why we use the partial equilibrium analysis. Okay, just because there is a partial specialization. Okay, partial specialization. Okay, in a two-nation world, the terms of trade of nation one are equal to the reciprocal of the terms of trade of nation two. Okay. 好的，等一下啊。那 sorry，OK。Just not take. I help my little doctor take a pee. Okay.
It's
Sorry.
okay.
That's okay. Okay. In the world of many traded goods, the terms of trade is a ratio of the export price index to the import price index, also called commodity and or net barter terms of trade. Okay. For example, if nation A1 exports X and imports Y product Y, its terms of trade are given by the PX divided by PY, where P equals to price index. Okay. Now, the derivation of a trade difference curve for nation one. Okay. This is derivation of a trade differences in difference curve for nation one. Okay. Okay. I will leave this for your. Okay. You just make a brief understanding on these graphs. Okay. Go to the next chapter. That is the effect endowments and the Heckscher theory. Okay. Okay. In this chapter, we are going to learn the introduction, the assumptions of the theory, the factor intensity, factor abundance, and the shape of the production frontier, the factor endowments, and the Heckscher theory. Okay, and the factor price equalization and income distribution. Okay, and the empirical tests of the Heckscher model. We often call this we also call the factor endowments and the Heckscher-Erlang theory as the Heckscher-Erlang theorem. Okay, the extending trade model to include the basis of comparative advantage, effect of international trade on return to labor. Okay. Okay, the HO model, there are basics, there are some basic assumptions. Okay. By now, we should be familiar with the way economics construct a theory. First, we would like to they will establish its framework by spelling out a series of assumptions. Then, once the assumptions are in place, the model can be solved and the experiments can be performed with it. That is the approach we shall take here to demonstrate the workings of the HO model. We return the first 10 assumptions described. Okay. Okay. The assumption one, two nations, two products, and two factors production. Okay. The assumption two, the technology are the same. The technology is the same and the technology is at the same level in both nations. Commodity X is labor intensive. Commodity Y is capital intensive in both countries. Okay, there are different type of production, but products. Okay, one is labor intensive, the other is capital intensive. Okay, the assumption 4, the constant returns to scale for X and Y in both nations. Assumption 5, incomplete specialization in production in both nations. Okay, now we can see that from the assumption 3, there are 2 factors of production, that is the labor and capital. Okay, and furthermore, owners of capital are paid a rental payment for the service of their assets. Labor receives a wage payment. Okay. This assumption relaxes one of the strict assumptions of the classical model. This was done because labor was assumed to always use the same amount of machinery in the production process of either good. In the HO model, the number of machines that workers use in production becomes an important factor in determining trade patterns and may change with changes in relative factor prices. Okay. And also, I think that in assumption 2, the technology sets available to each country are identical. Okay. And this assumption is one of the most crucial in the HO model. It says that for any good, say textiles, product producers in both countries have ready access to the same choices. Of production techniques. That is, various methods exist for the production of most goods. These methods typically involved the use of various quantities of labor versus capital inputs. The actual choice of production technique made by producers in each country will depend upon factors prices in these countries. That is, if labor is relative cheap compared with capital then textile producers will tend to use more labor-intensive technologies than textile products in another nation. However, if factor prices are identical in the 2 countries, then exactly the same production processes for any given industry will be employed in both. Okay. Okay. And also there are another 5 assumptions of HO theory. Tastes are equal in both nations. Both commodities and factors are treated in perfectly competitive market. Okay. Here you should you should know what the perfectly competitive market is. Okay. I think we have learned it in the economics. Okay. Perfect factor mobility within each nation, but not between nations. That is not the cross-border factor mobility. Okay. It's just the perfect factor mobility within the boundaries. Okay. No transportation costs, tariffs, or other barriers to free trade. Okay. No transportation costs, tariffs, and other barriers to free trade. All resources are fully employed in both nations. Okay. All resources are fully employed in both nations. International trade between the nations is balanced. Okay. Okay. The factor intensity, the factor abundance, and the shape of production frontier. Or the factor intensity. In a two-factor world, commodity Y is capital intense. It is the capital intensive. If the capital labor ratio, that is, we use the K divided by L, the capital is divided by labor used in the production of Y is greater than the capital labor ratio used in the production X. Okay, that is the commodity Y is capital intensive, and it is its capital used in the commodity Y is much higher, is higher than it is used in the production of X. It is not the absolute amount of capital and labor used in the production of X and Y, but the amount of capital per unit of labor that determines the capital intensity. Okay, we should read this sentence thorough. Okay, it is not the absolute amount of capital labor used in production of X, Y, but the amount of capital per unit of labor. Okay, the capital amount of capital per unit of labor that determines the capital intensity. That is the this is for the vertical axis. It stands for the capital, and for the horizontal axis stands for the labor. Okay. Now the condition is that the quantity Y is capital intensive. This is the capital divided by the labor in Y equals to 1. Okay. For this, okay, that is a nation 1. Labor in X, that is 1/4. Okay. In the graph, in the right graph, we can see the conditions in the nation 2. Okay. For this is the capital, and this is the labor. Okay, that is for the nation 2. We got the vice versa results. That is 4 capital in nation 2, and for the KL, that is the in X in product X equals to 1. Okay. The factor abundance in terms of physical units. Nation 2 is capital abundant if the ratio of the total amount of capital to total amount of labor, that TKTL, okay. Nation 2, okay. Capital to the total amount available in nation is greater than that in nation 1. We can see from this the graph, the right graph. Okay. It is not the absolute amount of capital and the labor available in each nation, but the ratio of it is not the absolute amount of capital and labor available in each nation, but the ratio of total amount of capital to be total amount of labor. Okay. The factor abundance in terms of relative factor prices. Nation 2 is capital abundant if the ratio of the rental price of capital to be price of labor time, that is the P, the price of capital, is divided by the price of labor, is lower in nation 2 than in nation 1. Okay. Rental price of capital is usually considered to be the interest rate. Okay. Well, the price of labor time is the wage rate. So we got the equation, that is the price of capital divided by the price of labor equals to the a rental price is divided by the wage of the labor, that is RW. It is not the absolute level of R that determines whether a nation is capital abundant, but R, that is the rental, is divided by the wages. Okay. That means the R is the rental price, okay? The rental price of the capital. That is the income of the individual who owns the capital, okay? And also, that is the income of the workers, that is the wages, okay? We will observe this formula and to see the dynamic change of the rental price and the labor price, okay? For the nation one, we can see that is the labor is abundant and the commodity X is labor intensive, okay? And for the nation two is the capital abundant and commodity Y is commodity intensive, okay? This is the shape of the productive frontiers of nation one and nation two. Okay. The factor endowments and the HO theory. HO theory is based on two theorems. The first one, that is the HO theorem. The first one is the HO theorem. A nation will export commodity whose production requires the intensive use of nation's relatively abundant and cheap factor and import the commodity whose production requires the intensive use of nation's relative scarce and expensive factor. Okay, that means a nation will make full edge of its abundant production factors. Okay. This is in producing one product and export that products. Okay. In short, the relatively labor-rich nation export the relatively labor-intensive commodity and imports the relatively. Okay. This HO theory explains comparative advantage rather than assuming it. Okay. This is the general equilibrium framework of the HO theory. Okay. That is the technology. There are several factors determine the commodity prices. the technology, the supply of factors, the taste, and distribution of the ownership of factors production. Okay. The taste and distribution of the ownership determine the demand of final commodities, and also goes to the derived demand for factors. And for the supply factors and the derived demand factors are the two main elements to make the factor prices. Okay. Also goes to the commodity prices. Okay. This is the general equilibrium framework of the HO theory. Okay. The HO theory model that is the nation 1. Okay. This is the nation 2. The nation 1, labor intensive, labor abundant. And nation 2, that is capital abundant. We can call the tangent point in their production possibility line. Okay. For the production, for the in nation 1 and nation 2, okay, we got this. We put these two tangent points together. Okay. That means the nation 1 can get the gains from trade. That get the surplus of get the gains of trade. That is the ECB point. For the nation 2, we got these advantages or the benefit or the gains from trade. Okay. Okay, just as we just discussed, the HO model. Okay, the HO model holds that the direction of international trade flows between two countries is determined by the endowment of productive factors in two countries, and the factor content of goods involved. In the two good case, just now that is the X product of X and product Y. Okay. The theory can be studied more precisely in the form of theorem known as the HO theorem. What is the HO theorem? A country will have a comparative advantage in and therefore will export the goods whose production is relatively intensive in the factor with which that country is relatively well endowed. Put more simply, the theorem states that the country that is relatively capital abundant compared with the other country will have a comparative advantage in the good that requires more capital per worker to produce. With regard to our assumptions, we would expect that the country 1, the country 2 will have a comparative advantage in textiles, since we have assumed country 2 is relatively capital abundant. Okay. Now we can see this figure. In this figure, in discussing the assumptions of the model, we have already determined that the PPFs of the two nations will expect increasing opportunity cost and will have different shapes. Okay, will have different shapes. Okay. This is illustrated in the in this figure when we show country the nation A and the nation 2. Okay. Okay, and for this is this HO model. Okay, that is the equilibrium in the HO model. Let us now consider the effect of the introduction of international trade on production and consumption decisions. Of a single country. After we analyze this effect, we turn to examination of the world trade equilibrium in the HO model. Again, we know from the previous previous studies that once trade is allowed between two countries, differences in relative prices will not persist. Consequences, the price of the will be, that is, the price will fluctuate among a certain spectrum. Okay. For the nation 2, there is the A dot export. Okay. Okay. The factor price equalization theorem. International trade will bring about equalization in relative absolute terms to homogeneous factors across nations. In short, wages and other factor returns will be the same after specialization trade has occurred. International trade costs W, that is the wages. Okay, the wage to rise in nation 1, the low wage nation, and fall in nation 2, the high wage nation. Reducing the pre-trade differences in wages between nations. Similarly, trade causes rental to fall in nation 1, that is the capital intensive nation, and rise in nation 2, the capital cheap nation, okay, reducing the pre-trade differences in rental between nations. Thus, international trade causes redistribution of income from a relatively expensive scarce factor to the relatively cheap abundant factor. That is the relative factor price equalization. Okay, for the horizontal axis, we got the wage compared to the rental. We got the price. We got the PX and PY. That is price of the production X and the price of the production product Y. We got the A, B, A dot. Okay. Then the relative factor price equalization. Okay. Okay. The factor price price equalization and income distribution. Okay. Okay. I think the price, the factor price income distribution, we are going to talk about this part next class. Okay. Okay, I will give you some assignment for the next Friday. Okay. Please pay more attention to the to our WeChat group. Okay. Okay, everybody.
Okay.
I think that's all for today, and have a good weekend. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, 老师.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Goodbye. Bye bye.
Thank you, Lordship.